All right, we're live. Give it a minute for people to find it. I'm going to hit the retweet button. All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to the Holler, tnholler.com, at the TN Holler on Twitter and Facebook, and also all these other hollers hollering across the state.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to your support. And I also want to send a shout out to two special people real quick. Elisa Parker, if you're buying or selling a home in Middle Tennessee, do it through her. And Abby Rubenfeld, if you need a lawyer. Those two people are very supportive of us, so we want to shout them out while we're on here. We wanted to hop on here real quick with an old friend of ours, Lisa Quigley, who was the former chief of staff for Rep. Jim Cooper and knows what's going on in Washington better than anybody I know, and has some perspective on the speaker vote circus that we're seeing go down right before our eyes. Lisa, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Justin.
Of course. So, just to set the stage here, they are right now on their third vote. It's riveting television, I got to tell you. People just saying the same names over and over again. Apparently, they have to go through it every time until they get somebody with the majority of the people voting. So right now, that is everybody. So I think it's 218 is the number that they need, or something like that. And, what can happen is people can leave. And so the numbers that they would need would be lower. But so far, McCarthy has not been able to get to where he needs to get to become the next Speaker of the House. So, Lisa, I guess let's start with, why is this happening and how did you know it was going to happen?
Well, it's first happening because the Republicans are completely divided, and you're really seeing it play out. You're seeing it play out in the country, but now you're seeing it play out on the House of Representatives. And actually, in this third vote that they're taking right now, McCarthy is going to have even more votes against him, right? So it's going in the wrong direction for him. And very soon, he's going to have to figure out that this is a hard no from this group of members. And at some point, someone's going to have to pull him inside and say, we're going, right? Like a group of 50 or 60 is going somewhere else. I don't know when that's going to happen. They can't swear in all the new members until they have a speaker. They've got all these family members in the gallery. They've got the little kids in their, patent leather shoes and tiny little suits, on the floor, and they're being quite patient, but this could go on a long time. I think it's the most interesting. The reason I sort of knew that this was going to happen, or had a suspicion that it was going to happen, is obviously the small margin. Pelosi also had small margins from time to time, but she's just an exquisitely good vote counter. And McCarthy's never been a good vote counter. Like, he lost this years ago when he tried to be speaker once before. And actually, this goes to show that he's even a worse vote counter than anybody thought, because no one thought that the defeat would be, quite this profound. And the interesting thing about this vote, it's the only vote that happens during the session where they actually stand and say a name, right? Usually you're voting on an electronic device. You walk in the room, you hit your button, you leave. This is the only vote where you're in the chamber, you're saying who you're for, and it is like super dramatic when it doesn't go exactly as planned. So the tension in the room, has probably just been incredibly high all day long.
So let's talk about who these people are that are holding up the train right now. It's the quote unquote Freedom Caucus. It's Matt Gaetz. I guess it's not Jim Jordan, because he keeps saying, let's give it to McCarthy, but it's Andy Ogles, our own Andy Ogles from Tennessee's 5th District, who this is his first day on the job, and he's already participating in, extremist hostage taking. What do they want?
Well, the interesting thing is what they want. Is the list is really long, and they put out a letter last week that said, here are all the things that we want. And the thing that gets the most attention, and it sounds so wonky and like, oh my God, I'm so bored, but it's the motion to vacate the chair. And the motion to vacate the chair basically means you can do this, which is happening right now. You can do the vote for the speaker anytime, any day. Any member can bring it forward for any reason. So basically, you are giving the opportunity for any member of Congress on the majority side to be like angry at you, and so call for the vacation of the
So
chair.
more chaos.
So more chaos. So it just promises more chaos. And so, by the way, he agreed to that. Like McCarthy has agreed to that in the last 24 hours, which is crazy town. And it wasn't enough, right? Like it wasn't enough. There's a long list of things that they wanted. Some are actually totally acceptable, and we should have been doing it a long time ago. There have been so few amendments, considered on the full House floor for years, both when the Republicans were in charge and then when the Democrats were in charge. So much easier to do the job if the bill comes fully baked to the House. So members haven't been really able to offer amendments that could allow the House to work its will. So that is a legitimate ask and should come from all the members. They should all want that, no matter who's leading the Congress. But all of their demands were met, right? Like all the demands were met, and it's still not enough. So clearly these are the people that came to blow the place up, right? Like they don't want to. In fact, I'm wondering if you're one of those 19 or 20 or whatever the thing is now, if you really even want to be in the majority, because it's so much easier just to throw pot shots, just to complain, just to blame Biden, just to blame liberals, do all that. I'm not sure they really want to be in the majority.
Right. And that's one of the things that you can't help but notice when they're making these speeches as they nominate people about how they're trying to solve all these problems. These are the people that oppose every solution that comes to the floor. These are people that have just voted no on everything, Burchett and Green and every single Tennessee Republican for so long. So for them to say, oh, we need a problem solver, it's just absurd on its face. Somebody who agrees with you that they are now essentially moving the goalposts was Karl Rove. He called this an utter unmitigated disaster on Fox News just now. He said chaos brings more chaos. And he was very clear that basically they got what they wanted. And then they decided, no, we also want Scott Perry to be the head of some committee. And then the Freedom Caucus members want to be able to choose their committees, which is something that, nobody has the power to grant them even. So it just keeps going back to what do they really want? You've even got Marjorie Taylor Greene saying she's furious and, is mad at them for obstructing, which is hilarious because that's what she does best. So where do we go from here? I guess that's the question. How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, it's funny too with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm sure she's furious because she cut her deal with McCarthy, right? Like she's for McCarthy. And I was just waiting to figure out what is it that she actually got promised? Was it to be on Intel? Because by the way, she couldn't pass a background check, but members don't have to on Intel. Only the staff does. So I have no idea what Marjorie Taylor Greene might have been promised, but she was clearly promised something. And if you shift to somebody else like Scalise, for example, who's the number 2, does Scalise then have to follow through with all the same commitments that McCarthy gave to these people? They don't want to make the House run. So would Scalise say, oh yeah, whatever McCarthy agreed to, I'll agree to that same, list of conditions that are basically holding everybody hostage. The way I'm not sure, right, how this will proceed. The real problem is that if the members leave, then you may not have a quorum. And if Republican members leave, then you have actually Democrat or Republican members leave, the number that you need to get to win goes down. And so I predict that the Democrats will there'll be an order of sleeping bags and cots, right?
You think so? Really? Is that what's coming?
There is no way the Democrats are leaving. They are going to stay in that chamber, because the thing is that if Republicans decide, to go ahead and leave, and by the way, this is an option because you can vote present. And if you vote present, it doesn't count against the number that you need for the win. Right. And if you're also not in the chamber, if you just don't come, or in this case, if you just leave, it also doesn't count for the win. So I know that the McCarthy people have been trying to figure this out, but I mean, honestly, he can't count, and they didn't deploy this as a tool. And they don't have the ability to sort of like send the sergeant at arms to like, remove people, right? Who could then be out so that they couldn't vote. Like that doesn't happen. So I don't know how this goes. I mean, the first of all, I would just say tongue in cheek, but Dolly Parton could save us here. I mean, honestly, can you think of anybody else that would have the support of everybody in that chamber? Just about. But it's
That's my answer for pretty much anything is Dolly Parton.
right,
So I'm
exactly.
with you on that.
But the scenarios that are, floating out there, which I mean, they're probably thought experiments and they're probably fantastical, but you could get the vast majority of the House Democratic caucus to vote for Liz Cheney. And you probably only need about 20 Republican moderates, to also join with to vote for Liz Cheney. And she would logically come up with a leadership team that was some type of power sharing agreement that would be really good for the country, I must say.
Well, so somebody else that we both know said that to me earlier today, and that wasn't the first time I heard that. I saw, I think the Washington Times or Examiner, one of those two, probably the Times, put that out there, saying that the Democrats should nominate Liz Cheney, and come up with a power sharing agreement, which obviously would, I don't think you'd ever see like AOC voting for Liz Cheney, but you might get enough Republicans to support Liz Cheney. How realistic is that? I think there was a situation in Tennessee, a similar one, where Democrats nominated a Republican and then the Republican voted for themselves, and then they kept Mumpower out of office, I think, once upon a time. So this has happened before. Is that on the table, do you think, that Democrats would stop voting for Hakeem Jeffries and nominate somebody who would be more palatable than a McCarthy, than a Scalise? Although I don't know that there are that many of those that are out there.
Well, the Democrats aren't willing to help them solve their problem right now, right? Like, this would have to play out many rounds more. I think it's not realistic. It's just an interesting thought experiment because you could see a way out if you really went outside of everybody's comfort zone here. I think the most likely outcome is that a group of members are going to go to McCarthy and say, I'm out, like I'm for you. I've been for you. I voted for you now 3 times, but you don't have the votes. And in fact, you're losing votes. And so we're going to go for Scalise, who's the number 2. And, I think Scalise would have the votes. But again, this is not a situation where you just say, okay, does he have the votes? Because there's deals to be made. Like everybody wants something, and we know who really wants something. We know those 19, who got everything they wanted from McCarthy and still voted against him. So it doesn't happen overnight, right? It doesn't happen like, oh, we'll go off the floor and have a little conversation and come back and vote for Scalise. So I think this could go on and on. It could be multiple ballots more. It could even be days more before we get a speaker.
Yeah, and I think the people who are out there, and I see you guys commenting, I appreciate that. And if you have any questions, hit us up in the comments and we'll ask Lisa. We're lucky to have her knowledge here on this. Again, she was the chief of staff for Representative Jim Cooper for a very long time and knows how this works. But one of the things that people need to know is that the record for how long this has gone, which was a long time ago, I don't know the year, but pre 1900s, it went on for months. And I think that was also like the last time that it didn't go down in the first vote. So we're already in uncharted territory.
The last time it didn't go down in the first vote was literally January of 1923. So it was exactly 100 years ago.
That's amazing.
And it went on for many, many days. Actually, in 1856,
that's the one.
There were 311 votes before they got, and it took months.
Right.
And it was actually part of it was very much caught up in what led this country to a civil war. So I don't want to make those kind of comparisons really, but like this is how extraordinarily rare this is.
Right.
Is that you have to go 100 years ago to see when this has happened.
Well, it's pretty fascinating that that's the case. One of the people that is involved in gumming up the works, we mentioned him before, is Andy Ogles. I'm curious what you think specifically about Andy Ogles. First of all, this is something that I wanted to show you. This is a tweet from Olivia Beavers about half hour before we came on here. saying that a few months ago they asked Andy Ogles about McCarthy, and he said he's earned the right to lead the caucus. I'll be supporting him. And
Yeah,
here we are, where
do you
he's
see
not
the date?
supporting him.
But do you see the date?
What's the date? I'm not
It
even
is in September. It
right.
was
So,
before the general election.
right,
So
but
Andy,
I guess I'm saying, like, what happened between now and then? Like, what do you think Andy Ogles specifically wants out of all this, other than attention, or is that it?
well, I think Andy Eagles very well may be another George Santos, right? I mean, really, can you trust him on anything? Look, Andy Ogles is going to be representing a part of Nashville, and he and Mark Green and Phil Rose, is that his name? Rose,
Yeah,
Representative
John
Rose.
Rose.
John Rose, geez,
Yeah,
have all
Phil
said that
Rowe.
they will be able to provide, representation, for Nashville. Um, I, how do we think that this guy Ogles can provide representation for Nashville? Because by the time they end up getting a speaker, he's not going to be on the side of those who want to govern, right? He's already showing that he wants to be on the side of those that blow things up. So I think that in terms of how this affects real people's lives, we're on a pretty dangerous course with this guy. But we knew this. We knew this a long time ago.
Right. And, Andy Ogles, of course, is somebody that called the pandemic fake and, has been racist towards Asians and a lot of ugly stuff. And said he was a police officer. So that Santos thing, that rings true because, we already know Ogles has at least embellished his past. While we're on that topic, real quick, and then we can kind of sum this up here. And I appreciate the time you've given here. But the Santos thing, that guy is under federal investigation, lied about everything. How surprised are you that something like that could happen? Because I have to admit, I'm actually pretty surprised that that could happen. I know Tennessee Democrats pretty well, and I'm not saying that Tennessee Democrats have their shit together better than any other state or anything like that. Don't have the resources necessarily. The media here doesn't have that many resources, but I can't even imagine somebody with that background telling that many lies, slipping through the cracks in that way. How does that possibly happen in New York, of all places?
Well, actually, it's really, really puzzling because the conservative newspaper on Long Island
Yep.
actually covered this extensively.
Yes,
And
they
not
did.
only did they make it news stories, but they editorialized in the race. And as a conservative newspaper, they said, we wish we could endorse the Republican in this race, but we can't
Right.
because he's a fake.
Yes, the North
And it's
Shore
like,
Leader you're talking
right,
about, that
right. The
small
North Shore
paper.
Leader, like,
Yeah.
what? And so the conservative newspaper in that district knew this, editorialized about it. A lot of other news
There's
organizations.
Ogles right there, by the way, on his phone.
Oh yeah, there he is. There he is. And I think it really got caught up with, so many other races, right? The Kathy Hochul gubernatorial race was close. Sean Patrick Maloney, who was the head of the DCCC, who ended up losing his congressional race. They were so busy covering that, and of course covering the Senate races, which were going to decide, the power in the Senate, or who control the Senate. I think all those played a role. But let me just tell you the other thing. I thought you were going to say how this could happen.
Yeah.
And I've actually been watching this story with great interest because, to me, I really wonder if there hasn't been a strategy that's being deployed around the country to get candidates slated to do the kind of thing that he's been doing, because we saw that in 2010 when Jim Cooper had a opponent by the name of David Hall, and David Hall came within 13 points. It was actually the smallest margin that Jim ever had a victory in 2010 against a guy named David Hall, who had reported $18,500 in income the previous year. And yet he reported that he loaned his campaign $70,000. Meanwhile, he had a defunct business and he had 5 mouths to feed at home. And what was happening was he realized that you don't actually have to report. There's no reporting process to prove that you've made a loan, like from your bank account to your campaign. So he reported a loan that was mythical. He never made it. And then as the campaign contributions came in, he just paid himself back. So he was basically living his life on campaign funds, right? It was a total fraud. And it was 2010. It was that Tea Party year. And just about every white Democrat in the South got wiped out, with the exception of 5 members, and that would include Jim, but it came very close, and he was a total fraud. And so the pattern actually that you see with George Santos really rung true for me, because there were so many similarities in that David Hall campaign in 2010. And then you just wonder, like, where else is it happening where maybe they didn't win, but they tried, and maybe they'll win the next time? Because remember, George Santos ran 2 years ago, and he lost, and he came back again. And I think the idea that you come back and you run again is everybody assumes that maybe you've been vetted the first time. I don't know. But the opposition research was terrible. It totally failed. The candidate, Robert Zimmerman, who I actually had a conversation with this last weekend. And I don't think that he's actually going to be a member of Congress for very long. I think he'll either be expelled by the Congress, or there are several investigations, both federal and state investigations going on. So I don't think he'll be there long. But, there's some evidence that there was Russian money,
well, that's what I was going to say. Yes. He's on record saying that he's been to Russia a lot in his career. And, Russia stuff was not a hoax, no matter what anybody says. So, and I think people need to listen to the Rachel Maddow podcast, Ultra, which shows how long the history is of, enemies of this country getting their campaigns financed by, financing congressional campaigns and using them for their benefit. So it's the questions need to be asked. Brazil's coming after that guy now, as Christine Park says. And, it's sort of amazing that he has now become he's really like an emblem of what the Republican Party has become. He should almost be the speaker. All right. So just to get you out of here on this, what do you think, we're looking at for the rest of this day? Is it just voting, and people literally camping out in that chamber?
Yeah. At some point they can decide to adjourn and come back and try this again the next day. And at some point, they'll probably have to, unless the scenario that I see playing out is the COTS, because if the Republicans feel like they can keep all their people, then part of the strategy is like waiting out the Democrats, thinking that they're going to like walk off the job, which is not going to happen. So I think at some point they're going to have to just like adjourn and then come back and have the whatever negotiations they have to have behind the scenes to see if they can get somebody who can get the 218 or whatever the number is at the time, because we don't know until you have a quorum call, what the actual number is.
Are you allowed to eat on the House floor?
You can't eat on the House floor. You can eat in the cloakroom, and there's, there's stuff in the cloakroom. It's, it's bar food, but it'll sustain them. But remember, somebody can always come back too and vote, present, which could be helpful to whoever is trying to get, to the 217 or 18 or whatever.
So you mean that they'd be basically saying like, I did my part, I opposed him, and now I'm just going to vote present and kind of let him go?
Yeah, that could happen. And that's probably what they're trying to make these kinds of deals. But who knows? I don't think anybody has any idea how this thing is going to come out.
It's wild. Well, on the one hand, it is kind of fascinating, just the drama of it playing out. On the other hand, it's so boring that it's almost like, daring anybody who is thinking about getting involved with this stuff to go do it. When you're there, which side is it? Is it like the epically boring side, or is it like actually interesting?
When you're watching this process play out?
No, when you're there, like when you've been there, in person as this goes. Yeah, in person.
Yeah. So, when you're there, usually the outcome is predetermined. There have only been a couple in the last couple of terms where Speaker Pelosi had to really work hard to get all the votes that she needed. And you may know that Cooper for a number of years voted for an alternative, but in 2019 and 2021, he voted present in 2019, and then he voted for her in 2021 after not having voted for her several sessions before that. But voting present in 2019 was precisely what she needed, because had he voted for a person, it would have been a problem for her count. But he voted present, and she had exactly what she needed to get it. And so that's where the vote counting comes in. You have to be able to have these relationships where you can go and you can talk to the members. And he would have never cast a vote that would have brought her down as speaker. His votes against her for over the years, from time to time, were symbolic, and he made his point. But by the end of his career, she'd appointed him to more committees than any member of Congress, and he was also on Intel, which is her most important committee. So it's one of those things where you have to continue to have the dialogue going and try to figure out how you can make this work, both for her and for him. And they were able to come to agreement, and none of those votes for her were ever as dramatic as this, because it's been 100 years since we've had such a situation like this.
It's an amazing thing to watch. Just as a final thing, the Tennessee legislature is starting up again in the next few days. Are you planning on paying attention to it at all? Do you have any thoughts about where Tennessee is? It seems to me like we have our own crop of extremists coming in, and it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better around here.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm always paying attention because I live here, right? And
Yeah.
I don't want to live in a place where crazy people are running things. I'm particularly interested in the division that you're seeing right now amongst some Republicans in the caucus in Tennessee that want to have reasonable exceptions for abortion in this state, and the vast majority of them that seem that they want to stay, in the place where we are, which is we have the worst, most restrictive laws in the country on this, right? Like hands down.
Yep.
So I'm going to be very interested in that and seeing if there's any way that they can find their way to a compromise. But I think it's so easy to just kill something in committee and say, oh, well, sorry, never get to the point where you would have like a floor vote. We got a couple members that are, I think, operating in good faith on the Republican side, at least on that issue to some extent. But I find it very hard to see the way forward that would end up having a good outcome.
Well, the through line with both of those things, just to tie them together, is, that law that you're talking about is a vote that Republicans took and now regret. A lot of them are saying they didn't know what was in it. Some lied about what was in it. And then here we have Republicans at the federal level showing that they're going to have trouble governing also. So there's just an unseriousness about governance throughout their entire party at both the state and the federal level. And to me, that's kind of the big takeaway is, we need people that are serious about governing, that understand that laws have real impact on people. And, I think that's a big part of the change that we need to see at both levels. Lisa, thank you so much. Yeah.
And I got to just last thing to say is that there's plenty of people that are trying to do the right thing in states. I'm working on child hunger in states, including red states. And you find lots of people that want to govern and want to make things, better. I just don't happen to live in a state where that appears to be the case.
Yeah.
In the majority, with the Republicans in the super majority in this state.
What's that called? Tell people what it's called.
Oh, I work for Solving Hunger, and we are trying to solve child hunger, and we do that by passing bills to really extend to every K through 12 children meals in school and for breakfast and lunch, because we are a rich country. We know that children are getting nutritious food when they're in school, and we need more of them to be getting that so that they can learn and have a better social, emotional experience, not be stigmatized. And it's going great. And we're working in red states and blue states where we have, plenty of members on both sides of the aisle that want to do this. So that's gratifying.
Lisa?
Yeah, I left you.
You're there. All right, I lost you there for a minute. We got most of that, I know.
Yeah.
Appreciate you coming on here. Stay in touch, and thanks for all you're doing and all you have done.
Okay.
Appreciate you. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. So that is Lisa Quigley, Lisa Quigley TN on Twitter. Give her a follow. She is smart and knows her stuff. Used to be the chief of staff for Rep. Jim Cooper. Speaking of Cooper, in his exit interview with the Tennessean, he said that he's embarrassed to live in a state that basically cares about its people the least. We were hoarding the most amount of money intended for poor people. Block Medicaid expansion cost ourselves $23 billion and counting, and a lot of people are suffering. So as this circus continues at the federal level, the next circus is starting up again at the state level. We'll be there to cover that, and we hope you'll keep following the holler as we tell you what's going on at the state level. This is quite a show to watch. You see yawns going on on the floor. We'll keep tracking it, and we'll see you next time.